Where I see most organizations moving to is using Fabric to connect to all of their data sources, model it, cleanse it, all of that data, and then have your self-service users or those, business users or analysts that are creating reports, then use Fabric as their one-stop shop. Welcome back to Fabric Threads, where we unravel Microsoft Fabric for you. In this episode, you'll hear an unfiltered discussion between myself and one of our great clients talking about adopting Microsoft Fabric at their organization. This organization has an on-premise, Power BI Premium, and Azure architecture, and they're looking to migrate over to Microsoft Fabric. So let's jump in and hear directly from the client.
Well, again, I appreciate you making some time for us, Dennis.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to. It's been a while.
So Dennis is with Collectiv, and we partnered with Collectiv a couple different times. One around Power BI training, which actually Dennis was the person who generously flew out to Boise and spent about a week with us here in Idaho, and
Nice.
did a great job. And then we also engaged them when we were looking at kind of what the tipping point was and what our options were to move from a per seat license model to service for Power BI and just use Azure more. And Dennis, you'll be glad to know we switched over in March, and so the use of Power BI is just skyrocketing at the city, which is wonderful to see.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So your analysis served us well there. We wanted to pick your brain a little bit, Dennis. We've got the typical situation where I manage a data engineering team that's very constrained. It's just a team of 3 engineers and some contractors. And then we're kind of a hub and spoke model. So we're the hub, and then the spokes are these data analysts that are out in the 13 different departments. And there's varying skill set, but I would say there's been an improvement across the board. And so it's a pretty capable group. Aaron and I are partners together in things like data governance and the community of practice that we do. And we started kind of trying to imagine, like, how do should we change the model? And then as we started talking about it, it's like, well, skate to where the puck's heading. And unfortunately, we're on the government tenant, so Fabric is like a distant promise for Microsoft, but they're saying now January
Right.
it should be available for the government tenant. So I know you do a ton with Fabric. It's hard for us to imagine what a day in the life is going to be like when we move to Fabric. We're still going to be a hybrid data shop, right, with lots of stuff on-prem and more
Yeah.
and more stuff in Azure. But we just wanted to pick your brain a little bit about what you see other organizations going through and kind of how it may shift roles and responsibilities, just how it sort of changes the data landscape for those folks.
What's really coming down to is it affects you as much as you want it to affect you. So, you don't have to go turn on any of the Fabric features and components if you just want to use standard Power BI semantic models and reports and dashboards. Nothing really changes from a Power BI perspective when you enable Fabric. So, you can use all of your standard Power BI features. If you stay on Power BI Pro licensing and you're still connecting via the ways that you currently connect to your data. Where I see most organizations moving to is using Fabric to connect to all of their data sources, model it, cleanse it, all of that data, and then have your self-service users or those, business users or analysts that are creating reports then use Fabric as their one-stop shop without having to connect to Azure, connect to on-prem data sources, connect to any other data source that there is throughout the organization. So Fabric comes at one-stop shop for all of your model data, and then people can connect Power BI directly to it, and there's new connection modes to make that quicker.
Fabric just seems like this mystery to me. Is it a product? Is it like a data mat? What is it?
Fabric is a platform now. And so basically what that means is that they've taken the data engineering, the data storage, all of the reporting, the analytics, the AI components that you would see throughout Azure, throughout Power BI, and bring that into one ecosystem managed under one license. So think, in Azure, you could stand up your Azure SQL database, you could stand up your Azure Data Lake storage, run Azure Data Factory, run Azure OpenAI and Azure ML for all of those use cases. You could create Cosmos databases for your AI components, but all of that, you have your resource group, you have your subscriptions, etc. But all of that is getting charged to you separately based off of how much of
So,
each of those components you're using. Power BI Fabric brings all of that together, and it's under one license. It's a
Oh, okay.
Fabric capacity. That's
I
it.
got that.
Fabric brought data lakes, data warehouses,
Uh-huh.
databases, data factory, Synapse,
yeah.
notebooks, all of these components into the Power BI interface and workspaces. So you
Oh,
can create
okay.
all of those within a Power BI now Fabric workspace.
It sounds like a pretty significant shift for organizations to make, and maybe even changes your enterprise agreement licensing or with Microsoft, right?
Oh, it does. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, if you're running on premium SKUs and Power BI, those don't really exist anymore, other than if you're under an EA agreement, which when you go and negotiate your next EA in a year or 2 or 3 years from now, they're going to move you to a Fabric capacity. They're not going to sell you a premium Power BI license or capacity.
What does that mean, like in our model, right? But like data services does the ingestion and modeling of data, and we have these analysts using some of that data, but also just pulling data from wherever, so that way they can get their job done, which is the resource constraint part that Greg was referring to. Like if they now have access or could have access to Data Factory and this, that, the other thing. And I did a very little bit of reading about Fabric, and it was like, you know, brings everything under one roof sort of thing. And I'm like, I'm not sure we want to give 30 analysts who else any of that access, which brings us right back to the same model and resource constraints that we have right now.
And so within Fabric, let's say, in your next EA, y'all move from, Power BI Pro or Power BI Premium into a Fabric capacity. You can go and disable those individual Fabric workloads that you don't want people to use. So if you still want people just to be able to create Power BI semantic models and Power BI reports, you can go turn off those other Fabric workloads like your lake houses and your warehouses and your data factory pipelines. So they can't go create those. And then maybe you do have specialized workspaces that are Fabric enabled workspaces, but that's very governed in who's creating what components are being used in there.
Would one of the benefits be that if our analysts are importing Excel sheets and things along those lines, right, as the more formal ingestion and modeling is taking place, they would bring that all into, I'll just call them fabric areas. But at the very least, if they leave, we still have access to all of that work versus now, let's say, where they're just doing it on their desktop or something like that. I'm trying to find, right, some of those incremental benefits for our current model.
That's exactly what Fabric and Power BI for that matter are meant to do. So you do have shared workspaces where you have multiple admins, and if somebody does leave, all of those components, well, they're shared. That's not just one person that owns all of those
Yeah.
resources and components.
Well,
That's
but
shared.
let me give you an example. Like right now,
Mhm.
we recently had a conversation where we were talking about everybody's use of Python, and it's all happening on their desktop, right? And so then they import it into Power BI and then they publish it. I think is the real like workflows that we have going on. Can like I'd like to see the workflow at least be in the cloud.
So you can actually create what are called Fabric notebooks, and those can execute Python, R, PySpark, all of those
Okay.
languages, and that's created inside of your Fabric workspace.
Okay.
It's managed in there. It's not done locally. So I think that's a great use case, for Fabric is creating those shared workspaces. Maybe it is a dedicated Fabric capacity on that workspace too, that now they have this amount of processing power to execute their notebooks, write their Python, whatever they need to do, and this is their dedicated workspace to do it.
All right. Okay. Well, that feels better to me.
Yeah, it does. But it sounds like, Dennis, it's inevitable that we'll move to Fabric at some point. Is that right?
What you would do, your next EA agreement, whenever that comes due, you will likely move to a Fabric capacity as long as that Fabric is enabled in the GovCloud, right? We know right now it is not enabled, so y'all would not be moving. Y'all would stay on Power BI Premium. So it kind of depends on the timing of things and when Microsoft releases that. But let's say, for example, Fabric is available in the GovCloud. Y'all can enable it. Y'all will likely move to an F64 capacity, which is the equivalent capacity to a Power BI Premium SKU. And in there, y'all will likely go in and turn off the Fabric components until y'all are ready to roll those out. So for example, your current Azure workloads, you can use some of the migration paths that Microsoft has put out that Collectiv uses all the time. To move some of your Synapse pipelines, your Synapse warehouses, and your Azure Data Lake storage over to your Fabric workload. And so there's migration paths to basically move that and do a lot of that for you. So it's not a big transition. And then all of that sits within Fabric. So again, it's not going to be something that's immediate right when you get access to Fabric, unless y'all, plan prior to that period that y'all migrate all of your Azure workloads. But we are seeing that, in the industry that, people are moving their Azure workloads over into Fabric because it is kind of that one unified interface for all of their data. And that's where they want to go to access it. And
all the SKUs are changing and now they've got an F in front of them, but it's like, it's the same. You have to translate. It's like, there's very clear that Microsoft's strategic intent is to move to Fabric without a doubt.
Yeah. And they released Fabric databases. So now that's, your standard SQL workload, stored procedures, views, all of that's, within Fabric now. They just released Cosmos databases. So if you're looking to do AI workloads and the AI storage for that, now they're bringing that into Fabric. They have different Copilot abilities within there now. They have Fabric data agents. There's a lot going into Fabric right now that, you see a lot of investment, a lot of new features every single month.
And are you seeing a pretty, relatively smooth transition for shops as they move those workloads, transition them over?
Yeah, especially, if you're in Azure Data Factory, you're in Azure Synapse, you're in Azure Data Lake Storage, a lot of that interface is very, very similar to what you'll get within the Fabric interface. So, it's not a steep learning curve for those analysts and developers that are already in Azure to move to Fabric. A couple new click of buttons, you'll be within kind of the standard Power BI service, but now the Fabric service. And so there's a couple, probably change management things there, but for the most part, it's going to be very similar.
Now, what are you seeing with Purview, and like, is it? I assume it's still part of the landscape as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So now they actually have Purview Hub that's embedded directly inside of Microsoft Fabric. So that becomes kind of your go-to data governance solution, data access solution, all within Fabric. So now they have Purview, directly within Fabric.
Is it part of the Fabric SKU, if you will, or billing?
Yeah,
Or
it'll be part of the Fabric SKU, and they're even getting to a point where there's third-party vendors like Prophecy for master data management that are going to be standard workloads. They're using the workload framework inside of Fabric, so they'll run under your capacity as well. Maybe there is some extra licensing that, for specific features, but those will work under, your standard workloads too. And once you do move to Fabric, I think that's going to be super common. Everybody will begin using Purview in some manner, either to do kind of your standard finding and acquiring of the data that's within the system already, or just putting in those governance rules and data dictionary type use cases.
What about learning more? Is it just the Microsoft side? Is that what you recommend, or is there other resources out there that are helpful?
Yeah, I would say, the Microsoft Fabric and a Day training, Collectiv is hosting those. There's other organizations that host them as well, but those are probably best for your analysts, your users that really don't know too much about Fabric, but maybe do have that experience in Azure or have that experience in Power BI, just to see what Fabric's all about, see what components they can create, what use cases are out there, just get familiar with Fabric. That's a good option, and it is free. It's a full 8-hour training day. Um, and then, Collectiv, we also offer our own set of training, very similar to what we've done with y'all previously in Power BI, but LinkedIn Learn's a great option. Microsoft Learn, now they have 2 different Fabric certifications that people can go get to make sure that if they are creating Fabric workloads, they have the training necessary to manage those. So that's my recommendation. That's been our recommendation to everybody is, at least have a few people within your organization that have those certifications so they know what's going to happen when they enable those workloads.
All right, Dennis, good seeing you. Lots of great information. I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Conversations like these are exactly why we created Fabric Threads. Real questions from real organizations that are navigating Microsoft Fabric for the first time, and we're here to help. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those below in the comments, and we're happy to get to those and potentially feature them in the next episode of Fabric Threads.